It was gloomy outside, and the city was almost completely destroyed. The protagonist sighed disappointedly. The guy was getting sick of the monsters always trying to attack him. Gene went on alert. He complained about the person who decided to run into the place. Gene turned his attention to the body that was being pelted by the beasts. It was exactly the man the guy was looking for, though the man by the looks of it was long dead. Gene stood and pondered what a sight it was. The monsters had paid attention to the guy, and he received system notifications about it. The hero was getting sick of this feature that couldn't be turned off. The monsters roared furiously, a hellish sound. The enemies went to attack Gene. He stood in front of the fierce beasts, and right when they were ready to attack he pulled out a dagger and used the addition along with the multiplication, then made the most accurate strike, which blew the monster's head off. The weather outside was sunny. There was a huge dome. One person started knocking on this iron structure. The protagonist was met by a player on high difficulty and greeted him. The protagonist asked to send others on such missions in the future. When asked what happened to the fugitive, Gene told how he was eaten by monsters, which surprised the guy, because the player was on high difficulty. Gene explained that when he arrived at the place the body of the guy was eaten by 3 A-rank monsters. The guy wondered if they were A-rank monsters. Players on hard difficulty are very strong, but each A-rank monster is stronger, and there were 3 of them. He was very scared, but the hero explained that everything is fine because he killed them. Gene offered to go to the dining room and eat, while the guy asked to tell him something honestly. He couldn't believe that Gene was playing on a low difficulty level. Gene explained that it was true, and he had done it to other players. The guy explained that everyone who went on the quest with the hero had died, so there was no one to ask. He couldn't understand how a player on low difficulty could survive in such a horrible place. He asked why Gene was so strong, since he, who was on a high difficulty game, couldn't even compare to the hero. The hero looked at him and seemed to be thinking about something. He explained that everyone else was just very lazy. The guys arrived at the canteen. The main character was disappointed that he was given potatoes. The guy explained that they couldn't help it since potatoes were cheap and easy to grow. The guy was surprised that the hero didn't have the quick grow discount, but the guy reminded him that he was an easy player. At the time, there was some sort of scuffle going on behind the kitchen. The protagonist assumed that someone had returned from the sweep again. The protagonist assumed that this person would just get arrested, but the guy asked to intervene. This kind of showdown was starting to annoy Gene. The man was beating up others and yelling that this couldn't be the ground. The protagonist asked to report to him what was going on here. One of the men walked up to the player and tried to announce that while he was in the maze the planet had changed, but he ended up getting punched right in the face. The protagonist watched this picture and told his friend that if he ate his food while he was dealing with it, the guy was dead. The protagonist talked about humanity being in danger of extinction, but the man didn't believe it. He started talking about how they could definitely stop a bunch of monsters. At the time, the protagonist thought that most players who come back from the maze can't accept reality and go crazy. Gene realized that this happens quite often and had one solution to the situation. The protagonist challenged the bully to a duel. He became wary and gave his name. He started taunting the hero, who was an ISI player. He reminded Gene that the difference between them was enormous. The hero told the guy to start fighting, and if he won, he would show him the reality the guy wanted. The enemy made a mad look. He drew his weapon and said that if he kills Gene, it's not his problem. The enemy activated 3 discounts, namely the attack increase, the skill for a more accurate attack, and the strong strike skill. Other people were saying that the newly arrived player was very stylish. The enemy instantly disappeared from the spot and was already right in front of Gene. He threw a punch that caused a huge explosion. At that time, the hero used nullifying damage from the first attack, which hit the enemy incredibly hard. Smoke started to develop. It became visible the main hero stopped this terrifying attack with his bare hands. The guy was terrified. as he had never even heard of such an ability. The protagonist held the enemy's sword in his hands and started to perform his attack. The enemy tried to block it with his ability, but the hero's skill cancelled it, and the enemy took 49 damage. The enemy seemed to be happy that Jean was dealing so little damage. At that time, Jean clarified if the enemy really had 10,000 XP. The protagonist activated a number of abilities, after which his damage increased manifold. The enemy started to get nervous and asked the protagonist to stop. At that time, Jean made a serious face and told the enemy not to die. He struck the back of the enemy's head, after which he was knocked into the ground with all his might, creating a huge crater. A shockwave began to spread around, and the enemy lost almost all his health from one attack of the protagonist. The guy asked if the enemy realized that they were really on the ground. He was lying on the floor screaming for them to stop joking. He was crying, regretting that he went to clear the labyrinth. Once upon a time there was peace on earth. But one day the heavens cut open and hordes of monsters descended upon the earth. After that, each person was given a choice, namely 4 levels of difficulty: low, normal, high and loner level. After the choice, people were teleported to the tower. The players could only return to the ground after clearing the tower. Upon returning, they saw their home planet, which was destroyed, and crowds of monsters roamed its territory. The protagonist said that they should try to save the world together. The friend had already run up to the hero, saying that he was glad to see him in action. At the time, the new player was desperate, and others were helping him adapt. The protagonist didn't understand what was so special about getting a weakling. Jean was complaining about the potatoes getting cold, and his friend was trying to find out how he got the multiplication skill. He also asked about other imbued skills of the hero. The answer to such questions was that the hero received these skills by hard work. There was a sound. The friend assumed that another newcomer had arrived, but the hero said that it was not so. It was actually the girl who brought the crates of resources. Her name was Lee Tae-young, and she had just returned. The protagonist was looking at the scenery and couldn't understand how anyone could think about this when humanity was facing extinction. He said out loud that he had always been disgusted by such luxury. The protagonist was surprised that the girl had gotten past the monsters and was able to bring the painting here without a scratch. The protagonist knew that she was the only one who could clear the maze. Jean asked why the strongest among them was the girl. She sat on the throne with a proud look and said that in their times it was good to be passionate about something. The boy wondered why she had called him and asked Jean if she had gotten the newcomer. She mockingly said how amazing it was that an easy player was teaching a guy on hard difficulty. The girl opened her characteristics window. The protagonist didn't understand why and assumed that she wanted to show off. Eventually the protagonist showed hers. The girl was level 258, and the guy was only level 57, and she called him pathetic. She said it was a test and explained that for an ISI player the guy had great stats. The labyrinth was divided into 4 levels, and for example the person who passed the hard level was 1,000 times stronger than the one who passed the easy level. The girl realized that the hero could run people stronger because of his incredible skills. The girl started to activate her skills. She swung and headed towards the protagonist at full speed. At that time, the guy was looking at her with a serious look. He easily dodged the attack, which caused a huge explosion, and looking at the girl with one eye closed, he asked why the girl did it. She said she did it for fun, nothing more. The girl started to say that the guy has all the cheat skills, and he admitted that there are about 230 of them. The girl remembered what Jean had said about getting all the skills in the maze, and regretted that she had rushed the mop-up in her time. The protagonist didn't give any answer, only said that it was in the past. The girl said that the hero was incredible, and if he had originally chosen the single-player difficulty level, he could easily defeat all the monsters. Although the protagonist had incredible skills, but the strength depended on the level. In fact, Jean couldn't use his skills to their maximum because of the difficulty he chose. The hero didn't understand the point of talking about the past if nothing could be changed. The girl said that she had returned from patrolling and reported that a new wave would soon arrive, which had a noticeable effect on the guy. Horrible memories came over him, and he instantly assumed that in that case they were corpses. With each wave people lost territories and lives. In the first wave soul was lost. In the second, half of the top players died. In the third wave, the territory shrank to one small town. And now it was time for the fourth wave. The girl said that there would be one S-rank monster, dozens of A-rank monsters, hundreds of B-rank monsters, and in the end the apostle himself. The protagonist realized that even one S-rank monster will be stronger than the girl, and in the wave will participate in hundreds of other monsters. The worst of it is the apostle because he is stronger than the S-rank. The girl finally asked the hero to take on two S-rank monsters. The guy assumed that she wanted him dead, but there was no choice, because Jean was the only one who could resist S-class. The protagonist started to leave the place. He intended to tell the information to the others. The girl said that the guy would not take away their chance to have a little joy before death, but he was determined to tell everything. The girl was left standing alone in the room. She thought about the fact that Jean was strong in the end, he could lead them to victory. She thought about the fact that she was actually a real coward and held a rock in her hands. At that time, the saddened hero's friend told everything to the others. People were crying. Some were praying as the end of everything could soon begin. The hero's friend said that they had lasted long enough as it was. At that time Jean reminded them that even so they would all die. At that time, they looked at one man whose gaze was completely blank. The friend said that he had a really terrible fate. He had just managed to get out of the labyrinth as soon as he knew that he would soon be dead. The friend asked how Jean, who has done a lot for humanity. The hero admitted that he is incredibly angry. At that time, a portal appeared, from which crowds of monsters began to come out. They were insane and instantly headed for an attack on the city. The friend asked who Jean should defeat, and the friend confessed that he had two S ranked on him. The friend said that he and the hero will see each other in the other world, and he activated the skill long jump and at great speed headed in the direction where there were monsters. The protagonist found himself in the sky and used the total observation ability. He was able to see a huge number of enemies that were approaching the city. The guy headed towards where the incredibly scary creatures were. He turned to them and asked if they were happy to see him. The protagonist began to undergo psychological checks from the system, and he was able to do so, thanks to his unwavering will. For a while the guy's body became invulnerable. The protagonist was determined to finish off all the enemies. The guy was serious about the upcoming battle. He was standing right in front of two legendary enemies. Jean could only hope that the monsters wouldn't turn out to be defensive and use full observation. The enemy turned out to be of the defensive type and had as much as 1485, 555, 1233 XP. The enemy went on the attack, starting to emit a destructive aura. At that time the protagonist managed to dodge, and seeing the enemy's health he assumed that he would not have enough life to kill him. Jean looked at the other monster and used the same skill. It was an attacker type with 125, 5212 XP, which theoretically could be broken. The protagonist knew this, but the problem was that he had no reception for these creatures. Jean went on a furious attack with a huge number of attacks, which in the end did 40 points of damage. The guy assumed that he should aim for the head, since the damage wasn't going through at all. The enemy began to charge his tentacle aura, and then produced a huge explosion, which thanks to the skill of the hero could not cause damage. Jean realized that it was almost impossible to dodge such attacks. After thinking about his options, he decided that the only thing left was to anticipate the trajectory of the attacks. Then he had a chance to dodge. The guy headed straight past the monster's attacks and activated the acceleration skill. He burst right into the monster's head. He continued to make attacks that had no damage at all. The monster used its attack again, and the hero's skill saved it just as much. The monster began to cough, while the protagonist jumped up to strike. The second strongest monster seemed to start moving. The guy assumed that he would try to protect his ally. As a result, the defensive monster was protecting the attacking monster, but the protagonist knew that this would be the case. He seemed to have planned it, and appeared close to the barrier that covered the body of the defensive monster, while the attacking monster tried to release his partner from this dome, but all was unsuccessful. At that time, Gene found himself one-on-one with the monster. The guy realized that being with him, the girl, would be easier, but he was alone here, so Gene started activating his skills. The protagonist realized that a defensive monster wouldn't be able to hurt the girl, so she would defeat the attacker first. It was different for the protagonist, because each of these monsters could kill him with a single blow. The protagonist continued to use many skills to multiply his attack. Using the last skill, he became as serious as possible. Gene made an attack of unbelievable proportions. Even using all possible skills, he did not have enough damage, so the hero decided to push his body to the limit and used another skill that made the attack twice. After such an incredible use of skills, the monster with seemingly almost infinite XP was defeated. At that time, the second monster launched an attack that hit the guy, and he took 22,000 damage. The protagonist used all the defense skills to survive the attack, and he succeeded. The guy used up all of his attack nullification, and his stamina is only enough for one time. He made an attack on the monster that didn't hurt him at all. The protagonist was intent on using the tactic of hit, dodge, and so on ad infinitum. However, the protagonist had a huge problem, namely that his mana was at 0, so he had to make ordinary attacks that took a very small amount of health. As the city rumbled with huge explosions, the protagonist continued to strike an infinite number of blows. The monster's HP decreased just a little bit at a time. Gene was already at his limit, but he managed to demolish 90% of the monster, seemingly unbreakable for him. The guy's physical and psychological state was already at its limit, and he screamed with all his might. After a huge amount of time, the system congratulated the hero on the fact that he received new skills. He just asked her to be quiet. The enemy was already quite wounded and seemed unable to move. The protagonist was finally able to deliver the final blow with his sword, and the monster that Gene had defeated using only his weak attacks and persistence was finally defeated. The system notified the hero that the gods of all dimensions could not contain their delight at seeing such a feat. The protagonist was lost in time. It seemed to him that the battle lasted at least a month, and complained about his low stats. Totally wounded and tired, the guy headed back to the city. He continued to move slowly because of his damaged body. The town was in shambles, with the bodies of dead players lying in the street. The protagonist continued his movement into the depths. Seeing the bodies of the strong players, who used to show off, the hero didn't understand why he was the only player left among all those hardcore players. He didn't understand why he came back if all his comrades were dead. He saw the bloody corpses of his friends. Seeing the face of his dead friend, he was very upset. Gene began to remember the moments when he always gave him potatoes. The guy was completely saddened. He looked towards where the body of the girl, who used to always smile and banter, was lying. Even she, who had passed the solo level, had been killed. She was the only one of her kind, the strongest, but she couldn't resist the power of the monsters. The monster that killed the girl began to appear. It appeared right between the hero and the girl. It began to draw out and finally showed the strongest monster, the Apostle. The intimidation didn't work on Jin, and he sent the enemy away. The enemy was surprised that the hero didn't react, and the guy made an attack that didn't even seem to count. Gene told the main enemy to come up and fight him. The guy's gaze was very hard. The city was destroyed to the ground. He stood in front of the strongest monster, and in a moment he realized that this was probably the end. And so it turned out. The enemy pierced through the body of the hero with his hand. The guy assumed that this is the end of everything. The guy fell to the ground and his health was at 0. Thanks to the skill, he could hold on for another minute. Gene couldn't die peacefully, and he couldn't feel his body as all his organs were destroyed. The guy's ability didn't heal him, but only allowed him to get an extra minute. The hero assumed that the monster realized that he would die in a minute. Lastly, the hero called the whole thing a curse. A huge rift appeared in the sky. The hero began to blame himself for choosing an easy level. Even a normal one would have been enough for him. Stopping, the hero began to blame his friends for not pumping harder. He was angry that his friends died so easily. He was very angry because if they were half as hard as him, Gene was sure that in that case, they would have survived. The strength started to leave the guy's body. He slumped down and decided to let it all go. He couldn't do anything about his choices in the past, therefore believing others was a mistake. He knew that humanity was going to end anyway. The protagonist noticed the stone in the girl's hands. He realized that she was taking care of it with all her might. With his last strength, the hero began to crawl towards the object. The monster seemed to want to stop the hero, but he used his last chance to stop time. He managed to get to this thing. He saw that this thing could send one person to the past. The hero couldn't understand why the girl didn't take this chance. A huge monster appeared from the sky, and the hero said goodbye to everyone. He used this object, and everything around him was filled with light. He saw little himself listening to a huge amount of insults directed at him. He was standing right in front of himself from the past, who was desperate. The hero from birth needed his parents to take out their anger on him. He felt weak. That's why he chose this level of difficulty in the past. Now the hero knows he's not weak at all, and he has talent. Gene woke up in a room. The guy was incredibly surprised and could not come to his senses. He looked around where there was a lot of garbage, and the room itself looked more like a basement. The hero immediately grabbed the phone and realized that he really managed to return to the past. It was January 1st, 2020. Then at the dawn of the new year, no one thought that the destruction of humanity would begin. The guy proceeded to eat pizza and seemed incredibly happy to taste the flavor again in years. After the apocalypse began, humanity had only potatoes and monsters to eat. After a short period of time, the pizza box was empty. The guy couldn't even imagine that a girl could have such an item. Even after learning about it, he couldn't understand why she didn't use it on herself. He was sure that the girl wanted to use the item and hide somewhere. The guy stepped out onto the balcony and looked out at the whole human world. In 2 minutes, everything was going to start. People all over the world were now happily counting the minutes until the new year started. Everyone expected things to get better in the new year. But unfortunately, the whole world would turn into an apocalypse at exactly 12 o'clock. People heard a strange sound and assumed it was some kind of show. Looking up at the sky, they all saw a huge monster that seemed to be trying to break into their world. Everyone started to panic, but not the hero, who was looking at this familiar sight. Now the hero knows that this monster is only some B rank. As soon as the hero was surprised that there is no notice, it appeared. All the people in the world were sent a notification that any weapons were useless against the monsters that sheared into their world. The system told the people not to be afraid. The monster started to fill its belly with fire and shot straight at the people, and the system continued and said that the gods had mercy on the people and decided to give all the people on earth a chance. The system told them that by making this choice, they would enter the labyrinth. The system said that people need to clear the labyrinth to gain power. At that time there were options, and the hero thought that this is just a spectacle for the gods. Now for the already confident protagonist, there was a new path where he could rewrite the history of the future. The easy difficulty level had a huge amount of food and safe places on each level, where even a bad player could survive. On normal level there were much less safe places and food, but if you try and do not give up, you could overcome this difficulty. On the high level of difficulty was incredibly difficult to survive, because at every turn dangerous monsters, and without a safe place there is no way to survive. The game mode is lonely, in which the player will never meet others, and around will be only dangerous monsters and NPCs. At this level of danger the chance of survival is 0. The system warned that if the player is dear to life, he should not choose this level. There was a huge crack in the sky, and the hero looking at it said that let him just wait. The guy chose the single-player mode, and the system wished him luck. The protagonist found himself in a city that looked like a medieval city. Looking at this place, the protagonist felt nostalgic. The guy smiled, because it had been a long time, and he was in this place again. The protagonist saw that there were already messages in the general chat room. Only the chat was an opportunity to communicate with other players on other levels, and there you could share experiences and much more. The protagonist thought that there was not much point for him to chat there now. Now the protagonist had to check one thing. He remembered the moment when he talked to a girl who told him that the NPCs on the single level were different. They could have intelligence and move quite freely. It even seemed to her at that time that they were like ordinary people. One of these people was sitting on the ground leaning against the wall of the city. The protagonist recalled that on his difficulty level the NPCs were normal, and here he said that he assumed Jean would take another 30 days to reach the city. The only thing that bothered the guy was that this man was stronger than the girl, even though he is one of the weakest NPCs. The man explained that his job was to explain the rules to the hero. The guy explained that people who died on this difficulty level become gatekeepers. The guy explained that there is chaos and destruction in the world right now, and that a higher being has given humans a chance. The guy added that this favor was unnecessary, because it would have been easier to just die out. The protagonist realized that the man across from him was talking as if he had been through it himself. He realized that the NPCs were ordinary people who died on this difficulty level. The protagonist did not react to the man's words that his world had been destroyed, which surprised the man, because this was not the reaction he expected. This man even thought about beating the hero and then began to explain, but it did not have to do. He explained that in front of the hero was the gate of the labyrinth, which could also be called a tower or whatever you want to call it. He explained that the labyrinth has only 100 floors, and on each 10 floors the atmosphere is very different. He explained that it was necessary to look for water and pee by oneself, and the information was the same. The hero was surprised by the scarcity of information. The guy explained that he did not intend to tell about each of the 100 floors, and said that the hero could get information from the merchant. Jean remembered how the girl complained about the gatekeeper, and now she understood what it was about. The guy began to swipe his finger, creating a gap in the space. He told the hero that he would give him a thing that would be useful for the first time. He started to create something. This thing turned out to be a spear. The hero didn't react to the appearance of it. The guy smiled, looking at Jean, and struck a direct blow directly at him. The hero easily saw the attack, but still did not react. Seeing this reaction, the guy stopped. He smiled and put his spear away. The protagonist received a worn leather armor and a rusty dagger. The things were terrible, but they would do for a start. Jean said the dagger was bronze, and the guy assumed he wanted to complain. But that's not what the hero meant, which made the guy think twice. The protagonist asked what was wrong, and the guy said it was fine. The protagonist was given one more additional item, namely a worn leather handcuff. The protagonist was surprised, because the girl did not tell about it. The guy said that the protagonist had gotten some skills, and asked him to check them as soon as the protagonist entered the labyrinth. At the end, the guy wished Jean good luck. The guide was very surprised that the hero was smiling, as if he was incredibly eager to enter the labyrinth. Thinking back to his past, he had met many heroes who had never dared to enter the labyrinth, but he knew that the protagonist was different from them. He couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but assumed it was the will to live. The seemingly indifferent guide hoped that Jean could survive. At that time, Jean saw a system notification that explained that when the labyrinth was created by a genius magician, and said that whoever could pass it would be able to fulfill any wish. The system said that despite the dangers, if the player managed to pass it to the end, eternal glory would await him. Jean saw a glare of blinding light. The system told him that this was the first floor, and the monsters here are weak and die from stabbing. The boy with a smile on his face was ready to begin his journey. There are many secret places in the labyrinth. You can get many rewards for exploring the mysteries. The first quest was to kill the first floor boss, and the reward was a potion boosting random characteristic. Gene thought back to the past when he found out that the girl also had a merchant. Although the hero merchant had a very meager inventory, but in single-player mode, he had a huge amount of items. The girl showed him a bracelet that reduced the damage he received by 50. Gene at the time was very surprised that they were selling such a thing. The girl said that the merchant had a huge amount of great items that she couldn't afford. The guy was thinking about what the girl said, that if he had the merchant's things, he would even then be stronger than her. The protagonist didn't really pay much attention to those words then, though now it directly affected him. The protagonist arrived at the shop where he was greeted by an old man. The protagonist looked at the lost king, and after a while, he said hello, and the old man called him well-mannered. Gene introduced himself to the merchant and clarified if he was selling things. The protagonist looked around and told him that he didn't see any items on the stalls. At that time, the old man explained that if he started to display his goods, he would not even have enough for a whole floor. The merchant also told him that he had no intention of showing his treasures to the boy. Gene didn't understand why the old man was in this place if he wasn't selling anything. The merchant's face changed. He became angry and shouted that he was in this place not of his own free will. He said he would never show his treasure to such an ignorant man. After some thought, the old man said that if the protagonist showed what he could do, it could be changed. The guy looked at the place the merchant pointed to. He promised that if the hero could return from there alive, he would show him his goods. Gene realized that his task is to survive, and then there will be an opportunity to buy things from the merchant, but just in case, he clarified whether it is all conditions. The old man seemed hesitant. He just called the protagonist a weirdo. The protagonist joked, saying that maybe he would have to clear the whole labyrinth in order to buy something. After that, the guy turned around and headed on his way. The old man was surprised by this reaction, because usually people shake with fear when they see a dungeon. Looking at Gene, it seemed to him that he had no such feeling as fear. The merchant couldn't believe it and stretched and said that the guy couldn't go back anyway. Inside that place were torches that illuminated everything around. The protagonist confidently moved along the corridor and thought that so far there was no difference with the ISI level. There was an unpleasant sound, and turning around, the hero realized that he was wrong. Behind his back was a monster, namely a large rat. The enemy immediately attacked the protagonist. The hero remembered that at a low level, such a rat boss 5th floor, and here is a normal mob, which has already caused Gene damage. The guy seemed to think about something. Although this monster and has a weak defense, his speed makes up for it, because even at the level of ISI they needed a whole team to kill one. Now the protagonist realized the difference, because it is a regular monster on a single. The hero could not hit the monster. He realized that she is as fast as in his previous life. At level 1, he and his team drove the rat for a long time until it got tired. The protagonist was alone now, and his stats were lower than back then, so there was no chance. The girl said that it was so bad that she was running away from the enemies. None of the players alone did not fight this monster on the 1st floor. The guy remembered the moment when the old man sent him to this place, and he seemed to understand how things worked. Gene knew that the principle of rewards was very simple. It was enough to achieve what other players had not achieved. Fighting with the monster, guy thought about the fact that for the reward is enough to do something that will cause respect, then the rewards for such a thing will be appropriate. The goal of the hero was to become the strongest, so he had no intention of running away. He tried to kill the enemy, but he managed to avoid the attack and retreat back. Although the hero could not keep up with the enemy, but he could anticipate his movements. At that time, the rat began to shake with fear, and the protagonist thought about the fact that this is a living creature, and like any living creature it can be studied. The guy carefully watched the monster, reading literally every contraction of its muscles. The protagonist struck, as he decided that this was the most opportune moment to do so. Such an attack frightened the monster, and its reaction speed became slower. At that time, the hero realized that from that moment onwards, the enemy would be looking for his most vulnerable spot. He was sure that the monster will not jump high, because he knew what will be his target. The enemy pounced on the player trying to attack, but the protagonist outsmarted the monster by using the received item for defense, and then saying that the monster is finished, pierced the body of the rat with a sword. After this, he began to strike many blows to kill the beast. As he finished, he returned to the old man, who looked evaluating, but as soon as he looked at the hero his face changed. The guy returned with the rat meat to the merchant's surprise. At that time the other players in the chat room were complaining about the terrible merchant as much as possible. The players were really pissed off that he was behaving differently than normal merchants. Some of them even wanted to punch him, but they stopped in time. The old man was shocked that the protagonist was able to survive. The guy was upset that the merchant didn't want him to come back, but he started to deny it. The protagonist put meat and a rat skin on the table. The protagonist asked how much he could sell it for, and the merchant was shocked that the guy didn't run away and kill the monster. The old man was shocked that the newcomer was able to kill a large rat. The hero stood and waited for the information he asked for. The old man said that the guy had passed the test and added that he had absolutely everything. Jean was immediately interested in the siege shield. The old man asked why the guy needed a big shield. The protagonist explained that he wanted to crush enemies with it. The old man smiled and said that was the right answer and opened the golden door. The protagonist saw the light, and the old man took out the shield and asked if the protagonist liked it. Jean was very surprised that a shield of such quality could be obtained on the first floor. The price of the shield was 500 gold, but the hero had a little less than half of that amount, so he went straight to catch more rats. The old man gave the shield for nothing, but he also started to get some potions, and said that he had enough money for it. The hero was surprised at what was going on. He started to be pelted with a huge amount of objects, and everything was completely different from what the girl told him. When asked why the old man was helping, he only complained that this is how Jean responds to good. The merchant asked the lad to consider it as an investment. The old man told the lad to choose any potion he wanted, as each one was affordable to him. Most of the items offered were potions, many of which increased strength for a time. Some increased speed, and other parameters, which was very necessary when going through the labyrinth. Jean thought about the fact that at the moment he needed a completely different thing. The protagonist had heard that in this complexity, it is hard to get potions, and their purchase could be a loss to him. The guy's attention was drawn to a simple bow that had an accuracy of 20%. The protagonist thought that with the bow, he would be able to avoid many unpleasant situations in the future. The protagonist found out that he was offered 70 gold pieces for the skin of a rat, so he sold it and asked for the bow and arrows. After such an answer, the old man was very happy. He gladly provided the hero with a bow and arrows, which confused the guy a bit. The merchant said that in the labyrinth health does not regenerate by itself, but the hero knew that. The old man told about a place on the first floor where you can heal, and said that he would show it to you now. The merchant marked a tedious place on the hero's map. The guy remembered that the old man also told the girl about the source, but also swore at her. Jean was very interested in why the merchant was so kind to him. The protagonist assumed that here they judge by deeds, and by doing everything right, it is possible to get a lot of bonuses. The guy thought that even people's attitudes change from deeds. At the time the protagonist was able to kill another rat, the hero activated the otherworldly interference skill, which he adored. The moment he killed the first rat, he received a huge amount of notifications. In addition to basic chipping, he was able to get a huge number of other skills. The guy realized that the difference between the difficulties was simply colossal, and the hero's favorite skill allowed him to steal some of the power of defeated opponents. The protagonist assumed that the skill that he got in a fight with a strong monster, and which was blocked because he was not in the tower, then unlocked when he got back into the tower. Now, with this skill, the guy is a little closer to his goal, namely to become the strongest creature. As the protagonist was walking down the corridor towards the source of life, a monster appeared from the darkness, namely another big rat. Later the guy heard a huge amount of squeaking. It turned out that the rat was not alone, and the system called this situation complex. After all, Gene found himself surrounded by monsters. The guy began to look around. He really found himself in relation to the monsters, although the guy was bigger than the enemies, but they were three, and they were well aware of their advantage. The protagonist started to pass the mental check. The rat was surprised, as he expected the player to try to escape, and he was rushing forward to attack. The hero easily passed the mental check and attacked the monster. All stats were increased, and the guy reacted to the attack from the back and hit one of the rats to the wall with his shield. Now Gene could easily deal with the rats and kill them. 2 rats had already been killed and Jin's level increased. The last monster was left, which was frightened. The enemy prepared to attack out of desperation and got down to business by running at the hero. But the guy smiled and prepared to strangle the enemy with his shield, glad that the monster did not waste his time. A little while later, the protagonist reached the place. It was a safe zone that the enemies couldn't enter. The bonus of the protagonist discovering a new place was that his intelligence and mana level were boosted. Gene realized that the labyrinth was just crawling with monsters, and the store along with this source were just the exception. The guy had enough of a little bit of water inscription to fully restore his physical condition. The guy was surprised, but he also decided to sleep, because the mental fatigue was also present. The day came and the protagonist woke up. He decided to check the chat room, as he thought that it had already started to write normally. One person asked if it was worth entering the labyrinth, others said that there was no choice and it was mandatory, and some were looking for comrades to clean up the first floor. The protagonist noticed that most of the chat messages were from loners, as the other players could chat in levels. Gene was surprised. A smile appeared on his seemingly emotionless face as he saw a message from a girl who didn't know what to do and was asking for advice. It was surprising for the protagonist to see the girl like this. Gene assumed that the girl was actually just a coward who hid it under a mask of confidence. The protagonist pondered the fact that most people are alive now. The protagonist started typing a message. He thought about the fact that the rewards depend on the feat, and the girl was the only one to pass this level at one time. The protagonist gave advice, but knew the statistics, namely from 10,000 players in the past life only one girl survived. The guy was determined to start his advancement. Gene got the meat of a large rat that could be eaten. The hero tried his best to think of his goal, so that the meat wouldn't be disgusting. He put a piece of the rat meat in his mouth, and through the horrible taste he tolerated and chewed the meat. The result was successful because the guy simply got poisoned. In fact, poisoning is a dangerous thing, because if you do not restore health, it will always be taken away. In fact, for a beginner, poisoning would be a nightmare. The protagonist was easily able to recover all his stats with the help of water. Gene continued to eat raw meat, although he could buy a road ration, but it would cost a lot of money. In the end, the monsters of the labyrinth become the best food. The guy started to stand in a circle every time, eating raw food. Later he drank water from the healing spring. On one of these circles the guy realized that he was almost full. Through multiple repetitions of such actions, the hero became immune to disease. This skill was not limited to poisoning, but with the hero's skill so far, the guy headed towards the spring. He was determined to get another skill. He went into the waist-deep water and complained to himself about how he didn't want to do it. Then he dove in, and the system started notifying him that he couldn't breathe. The main character was in incredible pain. He had heard that death by exhaustion was one of the most painful. The protagonist got out of the water, and the system said that he almost died, but thanks to his efforts the guy got 2 discounts, namely breath holding and death line. Jin's condition was not the best. He could only hope that everything worked as it should. The breath holding skill can be useful for a guy in situations where the air is poisoned. The protagonist thought that although it was difficult, but she got 2 good skills. The death line gives the guy a sense of approaching death. The protagonist was surprised by the skill in this style, but it can't be that it was carried over from the past. Jin had no way of knowing the answer to that question, but he couldn't afford to sit still and think about it. He began to summon his blade, as he still had a long way to go to unlock another set of interesting skills. A little while later, the hero contacted a player and told him a few secrets. He was very afraid to do what Jin advised him. He did not understand how to do it, as it is incredibly hard for a normal person. Jin had been practicing his breath-holding skill. He knew that if you used a certain skill in a certain situation, you could get a new one. The guy was stabbing with his sword. Using the breath-holding skill while stationary and in battle are different things, and right now, the protagonist was stabbing using the breath-holding skill. After a while, it became hard for him, and he finally started to breathe very hard. Thanks to his actions, the protagonist was able to get the breath hold attack skill. The guy was already able to get more than 10 skills, and he was given the title of a player of skills. Jin was pleased with this news. What he used on rats, he could also use on humans, but holding his breath, he cannot be predictable. This skill helped the protagonist a lot in the last playthrough. The protagonist opened the stats, and he saw that his characteristics go higher than the girl at his stage. Now the guy was determined to start building his core strength. The basic skills were usually worth 10 base, and allowed Nanmogo to outclass the enemy. The protagonist began to bring cheater skills from his past life, which were just as basic, as they gave a huge advantage over other players. The protagonist got the skill full observation when 3 times pumped the skill shrewdness. The guy came to the idea that here you can open the main skill, which in the future will be very difficult to open. The big rat went to attack the main character. The guy was preparing for the unfortunate Parallelnia, thinking that he should definitely get such a skill. The enemy began to do damage, but the hero without any emotion just watched it. The rat continued to attack the guy. It seemed the hero was waiting for something and looked at the system window. He continued to watch the rat and watch his HP drop. A notification popped up that the guy was on death's doorstep, but he decided to wait a little longer. As soon as the notification popped up that his life was in danger, he immediately attacked. The steadiness of the death line skill grew. At that time, the rat was preparing before attacking again. It tried to attack Jin's leg, but he easily defended himself with his shield. Thanks to this deflection of the attack, he got an active skill, block. The protagonist realized that it wasn't a bad skill, but he wanted to get another one. Receiving constant notifications that his life was in danger, he blocked the enemy's attacks. In fact, the guy was trying to get a stamina skill. This skill allowed you to nullify the hits that were supposed to kill the player, and even the following hits for some time. This skillet could only get the main character. When allies asked how he was able to get this skillet, and on other questions about his cheater skills, he did not know what to say. There are several ways. Learn from another person, do something that others could not, or try to cause an effect close to the skillet. Thanks to the fact that he practiced holding his breath while fencing, he got a new skill. Because in order to get a skill that can block the last blow, you just have to block the blows that can be fatal for him. Thanks to a lot of attempts, the hero still managed to get the stamina skill. The guy was very happy about it. He used the attack to finish off the enemy. Jin couldn't give up a skill that could save his life in the future because of some fear. When he told his friends about it, they didn't know what to say. They just called him a psychopath. And it was a normal reaction for ordinary people. But the protagonist realized that without risk in the labyrinth, it's impossible to get anything. The guy started drinking healing water. His body began to recover. Thanks to recent events, he also raised the mastery of the line of death and calm consciousness. The hero was already thinking about what skill he should get next, but he was interrupted by a strange sound. It turned out to be some old man who was signed by the system as a man-walking god. The guy got into a fighting stance, which the old man thought was a great answer. The old man immediately asked if the hero was a pathfinder. He said that this is the name given to people who go through the plow, and the hero confessed that he was one of such people. The boy remembered that the girl had told him about this man. He decided to remember as soon as possible, but before he could think about it, the old man was right in front of him ready to strike a powerful blow. At the end of the enemy said to repel this blow, the hero was notified that this attack is deadly, and he was incredibly shocked. The main character realized that if he didn't block it he would die, so he put up a shield in front of him. The old man hit the shield and a very strong sound was heard. The energy of the blow was just huge. It seemed very difficult for the hero to resist such an attack. While Jean was holding on, the old man smiled as he was surprised that the guy was able to withstand it. The hero decided to dislodge the opponent's blow. The protagonist was able to withstand a blow of incredible strength, and his strength score increased by 1, and he gained the reflection skill. Next followed another blow, which was already near the guy's face. He realized that there was no way he could dodge, and the blow passed from what the hero was thrown far forward. The old man was surprised and seemed happy that the protagonist was able to survive. The protagonist took 35k damage, but it wasn't fatal, so it cancelled out. Jean thought about how all the NPCs on this level are incredibly strong. The old man said that the protagonist managed to surprise him. He remembered how it all happened, namely that the hero put up a shield at the last moment and let him go. The guy said that he couldn't stand still in front of such an attack. The old man said that he didn't intend to kill the hero, but even if he had used a fatal blow, Jean would probably have survived. The old man praised the protagonist, who was able to withstand his attack. The guy was surprised that this old man knew about skills. The old man asked the hero's name. He said it was a pleasant encounter and introduced himself as a god seeker. When the girl was in this situation, she complained about the rats that always drove her away. She was glad that at least this place was safe. When the old man approached her and started to strike, he stopped at the last moment and looked at the girl and called her a coward. The girl tells the protagonist that he then looked at her contemptuously and walked away. But in the situation with the protagonist, the old man was beyond happy. The hero asked why the old man attacks weak people. He explained that he did not intend to hurt the weak. He is a paladin. He called it a simple test for visitors to the source. The old man explained that he was testing the will to live, and he was pissed off by people who didn't know anything about themselves. He said he congratulated the hero for being worthy of his approval. The protagonist asked the name, or rather clarified whether the old man's name was Angel. He said that it was. The protagonist asked what kind of god the old man was looking for. There were a huge number of gods in the labyrinth. They were different, and they tested and rewarded the players. Most players don't care about this, as the gods can only be found on single player. The girl talked about how evil and disgusting the gods are. The old man said that the more people know about the goddess the better. He told her that he served the goddess of love, Labyrinth. He said that there was no better goddess in the world than her. The old man said that after the destruction of his world, he was the only one left to remember the goddess. It turns out that the old man entered the labyrinth to find the goddess. The protagonist knew about the goddess, and even where she was thanks to the girl, only she said that she found the goddess brutally murdered. The hero thought about whether to tell the old man about it. At that time the old man asked if he could ask a question. He asked if the hero was in a hurry to get out of the labyrinth, and he said no, because he really wanted to become as strong as possible. The old man started clapping with joy and offered to teach the hero discounts from the goddess. The guy indifferently said he was only in favor. This surprised the old man, as he expected the hero to at least think a little. Jean thought about the fact that it is logical to want the skills that has this unimaginably strong NPCs. The guy asked what the man wanted in return, but the man said it would be his apology. The old man sincerely apologized for using force to test him. The guy didn't understand the point of attacking then, but the old man explained that he was apologizing because the protagonist was worthy. Others he would have spit in his face and left. The protagonist agreed to be trained. The man seemed pleased that the hero agreed. The old man decided to begin and told the hero to attack with his flimsy shield. There were a lot of skills in the labyrinth. The ones that were easy to get were the basic ones. If you had a sword, you would master the sword. If you had a shield, you would master the shield, and so on with all the weapons. Such a skill could be obtained immediately after the acquisition of weapons. Such an opportunity had every player. The old man explained that the skill that combines all of this can be called one of the most useful. The old man said that this skill is the art of wielding air weapons, which even the goddess herself praised. The guy seemed less than thrilled with such a skill. The old man laughed, and the protagonist talked about how combining skills doesn't change anything. The protagonist couldn't understand what was useful about such a style, and the old man recognized that the protagonist's damage was now 4. The old man told the protagonist to hit him, but the guy went on the attack and hit his shield right on the old man's head. He asked if it was necessary to hit the head, and the hero apologized. The old man said to use his fist this time, so the protagonist got close and hit the old man's chest. The damage appeared to be less, and the protagonist realized that it was being altered by the weapon. The old man began to explain that if you use a gauntlet for 50 damage and a sword for 20, the damage will not be 70, because depending on the weapon, it will be either 20 or 50. The protagonist called this a logical argument, because otherwise players would just pick up more weapons. The old man explained that it is not convenient to use one type of weapon during a battle. The old man explained that sometimes it is necessary to use both arms and shoulders to fight. The old man explained that his body is a weapon, so there should be no difference in wielding them. He explained that with the skill you can get damage from the whole attack. It seemed finally the guy was interested in this skill. For example, if the hero has a gauntlet and a sword, no matter what he strikes with, the damage will be from the sum of the two. The protagonist was surprised because in this case, everything changes dramatically. No matter what the hero will strike with, the damage will still be at a high level. The guy realized that this is a very cool skill. He realized that the further he goes, the more useful this skill will be. Jean out loud called this skill amazing. This skill was as valuable as the basic ones. The old man asked if the protagonist wanted this skill, and he agreed. The man was again surprised that Jean didn't have a shadow of doubt. He asked the protagonist to relax. The old man told him that he could easily transfer this skill. The protagonist began to be covered in aura, and weapon skills began to appear and connect. Finally, the guy managed to get the skill of air weapon art. The old man advised the hero to train every day that would master the skill to perfection, as he gave the guy a ring that gave +1 to damage. In the past, the hero would have thrown such a thing away, but with this skill, it's very useful. The old man said he gave the guy everything he wanted, so he suggested they practice together. He offered the protagonist to test out his new skill. Jean saw no reason to refuse and called his shield. He stood on the preparation, while the old man instantly disappeared from sight, and instantly appeared in front of the guy ready to strike. With the maze, level up depended on any action in the maze. The protagonist continued sparring with the old man. The hero thought that no matter how useless the location was, if you search well you can increase your detection skill. Also, by blocking the enemy's attacks, the guy thought that this would increase his shield skills. The old man was hitting the guy's shield, and the guy thought that fighting with a strong opponent was of great benefit. 2 days passed, 2 whole days they sparred. Thanks to that, the guy managed to get the skill of persistence on the battlefield. The protagonist thought that this skill can only be obtained by fighting with players, and was surprised that he got it in a solo fashion. The old man said he was very surprised by the hero's skills. He asked if Jean had enough training. He said it was enough. The old man sat down and asked him to promise him 2 things, and with one of them, the old man said that if the hero passed the skill to a weak player, he would kill him. With the second, the old man asked to tell him if the hero learned anything about the goddess. The guy explained that the chance of them meeting was slim, and the old man replied that he was only hoping for a miracle. The hero thought that if the old man found the goddess, they would have a chance to survive. Otherwise she would surely die, so he thought about what to tell him. The hero asked if the old man wanted to know the whereabouts of the goddess, and he said that he did. Making a serious look, the hero informed the man that he knew where the goddess was, after which the old man was incredibly surprised.